Stacey Weingarten is a puppeteer, puppet wrangler, director, writer, and producer who got her puppet start studying with John Tartaglia and later went on to work on the show Johnny and the Sprites. Since then, she's worked with the Muppets and on Sesame Street, where she won an Emmy Award for her work on the show's 50th season. She also has her own theatrical puppetry projects, Rescue Rue and Runaway Rue, that have played off Broadway and at the Hollywood Fringe Festival. I talked to Stacey Weingarten about all these projects and more, including her work on the upcoming The Muppet Show special for Disney Plus on this episode of Under the Puppet. You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Welcome to the show that is preserving puppetry through the personal stories of professional puppeteers. My name is Grant Pachoco, and this is Under the Puppet. Stacey Weingarten, welcome to Under the Puppet. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me here.
I'm super excited to get to know more about you and your career, but I'm always going to start with the same question. My listeners know this. Do you remember your first exposure to puppetry, the first time you saw puppets?
It's a good question. I honestly don't remember a singular first time, but I do have a lot of memories of just having like the Sesame Street VHS tapes, the green tapes that we would have and play at home. And I like puppets in that way were kind of the TV puppet stuff was always around and on in my household. That would probably be the first one, just based on the fact that I was very little and I remember those green tapes very, very well.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to talk about all the stuff you do. You're writing, directing, puppet wrangling, puppeteer, all this other stuff. As a young kid, were you into like creative pursuits? Were you always doing creative stuff?
Yeah, more or less, yes. Puppets specifically, not quite.
Mm-hmm.
I was always a doll kid. Like I always loved playing with dolls. And I was into Disney. I never outgrew Disney. So the puppet stuff was like officially no, because I didn't like I know the people that were like, I was 5 and I knew I was going to be on Sesame Street, and then like 10 years later they were. But for me it wasn't quite like that. It was just kind of like I knew that I liked dolls. I knew that I liked creative stuff. I wanted to be a doctor when I was really little because my dad was a doctor. And the older I got and the more I got back into kind of the theatery stuff, I realized that maybe a career in the arts was more for me than medicine. And that's kind of what ended up happening.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned your dad is a doctor. Did you come from a creative family? Was there creativity in your family?
So like yes and no. My mom was definitely a very creative person. She was a teacher by trade, and then she became just a full-time mom once my brother and I were around. So she liked to do little creative like things with us, and she would make Halloween costumes and like do activities with us. But nobody in my family or even really in my extended family was in the arts. So it didn't seem, when I was young, it didn't seem like a viable career path necessarily. And then as I got older, my parents were very encouraging. Again, like especially my mom was very, very encouraging of creativity and kind of being yourself. And that kind of helped guide me towards where I am now.
Yeah, that's always great when the parents get behind it
Hmm.
and appreciate your creative talents. Now, I know you studied creative stuff in college, but when you were in like junior high or high school, is that when you got into theater, or did that come in college?
So I always enjoyed going to theater because my parents, I grew up in New Jersey, so I grew up with my parents taking us to go see Broadway shows.
Hmm.
Even when we were very, very little, like I saw Phantom, I think I was like maybe not quite 4, which is very young to go see Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
They would take us in for like a weekend or for like a day trip because you do Virgin Tunnel, you just go over. And they enjoyed seeing musicals. So that kind of transferred over to me. And I did ballet when I was really young, and I started violin when I was young. So I was always into like the arts in that way. And then once I was like never brave enough when I was really little to say, I want to try acting. I would like to do theater stuff. It was only whatever was available in schooling, which I did go to a school that did have a great arts program. So we did do school plays with our teachers and things like that. But I was always a little bit more on the more reserved, shy side. So I never pushed that part forward. And then as I got older and I got a little bit more sure of like what I wanted to do is when I started going, well, maybe I would want to direct, which is what I ended up in school for. Or maybe I want to write, which like I had one summer where I applied for two different summer programs. One was musical theater writing at NYU, and when I was in high school, and the other one was directing at Columbia because I knew I wanted to go to New York City, and I was interested in both those things. And I got a phone call that was, "Hey, congratulations, you got into the musical theater writing program, but we don't have enough applicants this year. We're not going to run the program." And I went for directing instead, and then I ended up going to college for directing, which had that happened in different order, I do think there's a distinct possibility I would have ended up going the path of writer before director.
Mhm.
Even though I do consider myself a multi hyphenate, I enjoy doing a lot of different things. So for me, like finding those things when I was like like more into high school and like doubling down on that stuff when I was in high school led to where I went to college.
And so when you started, you went to Fordham University
Hmm.
in New York, and when
Yeah.
you started, you were like, "I'm going to study directing." That's what.
I was admitted to the program for directing.
Okay,
So
yeah.
the way that their theater program at least worked at the time is you were admitted with a certain like concentration. Directing was one of the like it wasn't like NYU when you're admitted as a director. It's like in quotes where you're really like also an actor, but then you're a directing concentration. But with Fordham, it was you're a directing major, and you actually get put. You're not an actor who is directing. You're a director. So you get to do things like scene work and readings and a one act and a full length and maybe a student one act as well. So you actually go through all the paces of directing and then also producing, which because you produce your own plays. So for me, I went in knowing that that was what I was interested in doing.
So you mentioned you did like, these one acts and these plays and stuff. Were those pre-existing plays, or were you writing your own as well?
So as a directing major, I was not a double with playwriting. I was interested in it, but it never came to be for me just for my schedule. I actually double majored in communications because I thought I needed something more stable than theater as something on a piece of paper, which I now don't really feel is necessarily the case. But I basically filled my schedule with the media studies and communication plus the directing and a bonus minor in ancient Greek, which was an odd choice that had to do with summer camps I did when I was a kid. When I was directing, it was either pre-existing material, like the one act that was required that you direct as part of your major was a pre-existing material. So was potentially was the full length, but the bonus one act show that you could do was by one of the playwriting students. So I ended up directing one of my fellow students' pieces while they were developing the piece as part of my education.
You studied directing, and then you also studied communications and
Mhm.
Greek. Do you use any of that today in your work today? Has any of that continued on?
So yes, for the communications media studies part of it, because I also studied children's media and like the effect of media on children as part of my work. And I did a lot of TV and film communications and media studies as part of my degree. The Greek was a remnant of, I went to CTY as a kid. It was just like the super nerdy, it's a Center for Talented Youth that Johns Hopkins does. You have to like take the SATs to get in as like a middle schooler or a high schooler, and I qualified for the language based stuff. So when I did it, the first year I did ancient Greek and I really liked it. And it just kind of was this rollover where I knew I ended up at a Jesuit school, which is a Jewish kid I did not think I would end up at. And the school basically was like, you have to do a language. And I could have either, I think, taken one semester of Spanish with a lab, and it would have been a little bit more of a time consuming thing for one semester and been done. Or I could write out all of the ancient Greek language and like do it as a minor, which was like four semesters minimum. And I was like, well, I might as well just do it. And I did. It was just a thing that I had decided I wanted to do when I was a little bit younger and followed through on.
Excellent. Well, we can expect a kids show in ancient Greek
Mhm.
coming soon. So during your time at Fordham, was there any puppetry at all? Did any puppetry come in there?
So yes, but not a lot at Fordham. So rewinding the clock slightly, I got more into the like, oh, do I want to do this side of like it being interested in maybe puppeteering or being a puppeteer in some way when I was in high school. So I saw Avenue Q is my like dirty puppet secret. I saw Avenue Q, and it was the first time I'd ever seen like puppeteers side by side with their puppets in that way. And I went, huh, that seems cool. I think I'd like to try. And like it was one of those timing was just good and where I was worked out. John Tartaglia was doing a puppetry workshop in New York City at Ripley Greer, like one of the rehearsal studios. And I said to my mom, I want to do this. And she at first looked at the dates and went, like the SATs and the SAT2s are right around then. And I went, okay, oh well. But I had left the printout for her, like with something that she could look at. And so she called them and she just said, like, hey, my daughter might have to miss the first class. Is that okay? And they were like, of course, no problem. Which I'm like, now looking back, and as someone who would run stuff like that, I understand why they probably didn't care. And they were like, sure, if she's interested, we're happy to have her. So I did that when I was junior year, heading towards senior year. And so when I moved to New York City for college, Johnny actually wrote me a bonus letter of recommendation because I was hoping it would like kind of set me apart. At a lot of the schools, I think they were like, what? I don't know what this is. But I was keeping in touch with him, whether I was getting into certain schools. And when I finally got into Fordham and knew I would be living off campus in New York City, that it happened to be the same exact timing as Johnny and the Sprites starting up at Kaufman Astoria. And I was like, hey, I mean, you don't need any interns, right? Um, and he was like, oh, well, I'll pass your information through to our coordinator. And I went, what? And I went in, I interviewed, and I ended up working as like an intern PA. I was like devastated. They told me that the school wouldn't give me credits for it. And I was like, please, I know I'm not a junior yet, but I just want to do this as an internship. And they eventually hired me like 1 day a week. They were like, well, we can do that. It's important. Johnny said it's important that we bring you in. I was like, okay, well, I'll do whatever you want, basically. And then by the time the semester actually started, because it was over the summer, I had to wait till I turned 18 to get hired, and my birthday is like July, so I waited, I did that, I started working. By the time we got to the actual like year, they were like, whenever you're available, just come in, we will happily have you come and help work. And I was like, cool, that's great. And I loved it. It was like the most wonderful work environment. It was like a really great example of like how children's like TV can be, or how making art could be when it's like trying to do something good for the world and people working towards a single goal that isn't just about like a good piece of entertainment. It was also like something good for kids. And for the most part, everybody got along and liked each other and wanted to be there, which doesn't always happen in a work environment. So for me, being like young and impressionable, being plopped down in the middle of something that felt warm and inviting, where they could have absolutely been like, who is this young person? Why are they like, I was very much like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. So they could have looked at me and been like, ugh, who's this? And instead they just kind of like took me under wing and were like, this is how production works. And then I kind of got folded into the puppet department. And when I wasn't working in the office, they would swing me over to the puppet department. And then at the end of the day, I'd swing back over to the office. So I was doing that my freshman and sophomore years in the fall when I was not in class. I was working. And so like I always said I had kind of had like one foot out the door at Fordham, but it put me one foot in like the professional world with people that like I still work with 20 years later.
Mhm.
So for me, it was, even though I wasn't doing a lot of puppet stuff in school, I mean, I was doing some, I was trying, because it was also when I was like, I went to the O'Neill, like I figured out like the puppet world is bigger than Muppets and there's like a lot of cool stuff out there. But for me, it was like my eyes were just opened onto a facet of like entertainment that I wasn't as fully aware of as I think I would have been. I totally thought I was going to be theater or die. Like I was like, theater is art, film is art. I don't know about TV. And then I was like, oh no, TV. This is actually, it's like the community of theater,
Yeah.
but on something that's recorded.
Well, and
Yeah.
that's a great first production to be on too, but
Mhm.
also to have Johnny T there as well, because he does theater and TV. You know, and he
Mhm.
bridges that as well to show you that it can
Yeah,
be done.
it was what was really really awesome, also being like a theater nerd and being plopped down there and being in New York City and being on that show, was like all of the composers were like theater composers pretty much, or like up like on the rise theater composers like Pasek and Paul before their like EGOT were there writing like fresh from college on Johnny and the Sprites. And it was just a place where like there were also a lot of like theater actors besides Johnny that were coming through to do like guest spots. And each episode was essentially a mini musical, which for me, as someone who also like my medium of choice is musical, whether it's, short form recorded or longer form live. It just all of a sudden everything kind of made sense. Like everything that I was interested in previously suddenly like all came together and made sense to me.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. It's so funny because I just always think in college I would have never done. I was such a dum dum. I was like, oh, you're going. I was going to school down here, and it's like I could have done a ton of great internships, and I just never did. Anyway. I'd rather work at Disneyland than sort of work on my career. Well, I want to talk about the O'Neill Puppetry Conference. That was around 2007 that you went there.
Yeah, 2007, 2008.
And what sort of track did you go into when you? I don't know if they're called tracks, but
Yeah.
what sort of thing did you study when you were there?
The first one I did, it was, I don't know if they do it anymore or it's called the same thing. It was Video Anarchy
Hmm.
with Tim Lagasse, who I had known through Johnny and the Sprites because he was on Johnny and the Sprites.
Right.
And I enjoyed it. I liked the idea that we would all be making a film out of the course, a short film. And the second year I applied for something else. I'm trying to remember what I actually applied for. I applied for like doing some like I don't know if maybe I don't know if it was Video Anarchy again. Like I don't remember what it was, but they said, "Oh, it's full. Would you like to pick from these?" And I ended up doing rod puppets, which it was a good example of the first year I went. It was very much like medium forward, and I still use when I teach puppetry. I stole like the what I call the 4 hard rules of puppetry from Tim, which have to do with like why puppets, and for me, I had like why is it this medium of puppetry, not just like is it meant to be for theater? Is it meant to be for film? Why is it meant to be one of these things? But then the second year I went, it was a little bit more focused on like performance in a way because I'm more of a person who likes puppetry when it's like meticulous and specific. And it was Rod Puppets with Paul Mesner, and it's was not meticulous. It was much more about making a big character and a big motion, a big statement. And for me, that is out of my comfort zone when it comes to like performance, because I like filtering through the puppet and being able to find like the little moments. And so it ended up being an interesting experience that I didn't expect. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And have you gone back or just those 2 times?
Just those 2 times.
Yeah.
What ended up happening is I graduated from college and ended up starting to do like theater. I was writing more of my own stuff or directing stuff that the O'Neill was always in, at least for a while, was the lead up to when the New York Musical Festival was. So I was always like gearing up for rehearsals or in like very intense pre-production in June. And I couldn't take the week to go do puppet stuff. And every year I'd go like, oh, maybe next year. And then something else would come up and then
Yeah.
it just never happened.
Yeah. They should do a West Coast O'Neill. I know the magic is the place where it is, the O'Neill.
Actually, I was talking to people about that recently too. Though we're like, there should be something. There should be just something out here.
Something, yeah, a satellite.
Because it is far. I mean, that is it was also easier when I was based in New York to go. Oh, I'll just go up to Connecticut.
Yeah.
But being based on the West Coast, it is a lot harder.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in 2008, you started working with the Jim Henson Company and Sesame Street. What was your sort of path to get that opportunity?
I mean, it was a direct line from Johnny and the Sprites. When Sprites was ending, which I was devastated, the show was doing well as far as I could tell, as far as all the rating, like, because it was a time where we were still following Nielsen ratings. I feel like the world has exploded since then. But everything seemed to be going well, and then it was like, oh, it seems like it is not happening again, and the set was destroyed. Like they were like, so it's not coming back. They were like, we are giving away everything, we are destroying the rest. So Jane Pien, who was one of the like builder wrangler people in the department, like in the puppet department at Sprites, was like, would you like me to pass your resume through to Jason Weber at the shop in New York, for the Henson shop in New York? And I went, yeah, that sounds great. And so she did, and I went in and interviewed, and that was it. Like I ended up getting the internship, and then I just kept rolling my internship. I just kept telling them like I wanted to do the internship again. So I ended up doing it basically until I graduated with them, and I came in with some more experience than interns usually do, just because I'd had 2 years on Sprites first. But I still learned a lot while I was there initially, and I still do. I mean, you still learn all the time when you're like on any new production. But that was the start of it, essentially.
Yeah, I have some questions specifically about wrangling, which part of that is building and knowing how puppets are
Mhm.
built. Are you a builder at all? Do you build puppets?
My answer is always like wishy-washy. Yes, I do build. I am a builder. I've spent time as a builder. I prefer being on set, especially because I like production in general. I have an eye towards the directing and producing and writing stuff. So for me, just working in a shop is not as much fun. Now, if it's a shop on set, that's a little different. But those opportunities feel fewer and farther between these days when it comes to puppets, because there isn't always a shop on set. And I say that as I just came off of a gig where there was a shop on set.
Yeah.
So for me, I kind of pushed. I worked at the Puppet Kitchen building after I interned with them when they very, very first started. I think I was like one of their first interns. I built a bit for them, and I've built a little bit at Henson, but I pushed myself towards the wrangling opportunities because I liked being in the middle of everything on set. So that's my wishy-washy. Yes, I do. If someone asks me to build a puppet, I can do
You
it.
can
I've
do it,
designed
yeah.
puppets for stuff before, but I usually don't put builder first if like someone is asking the things that I do. I usually just don't put it first.
And we're going to talk about you. You have some of your own projects that you've worked on. Do you build for those projects, or you're just like it's easier to get somebody else to build it?
It depends on the project. For the most part, it's not even that it's easier. It's just that when there's collaboration, like the best idea is more likely to win. So I like being able to have more brains on the project. And then also, if I'm doing something like I'm directing the project or I'm also like a writer for the project, I feel like while it is possible for one person to do everything, it is often better to share the load.
Yeah.
So I usually, for like the projects that I'm more invested as a creator on, I usually try and bring someone in that I trust to help either with the designs or with the building for the project.
Excellent. Well, let's talk a little bit just about wrangling. And I know that some of these things may go out of order because you've
That's
wrangled
fine.
for many different
Yeah.
things. We've talked about it on the show before, but just in case this is somebody's first episode, they're
Mhm.
listening and they're going, "What are they talking about,
Mhm.
puppet wrangler?" And I was going to ask you this because you have a definition on your website. So can you tell us, maybe for people who don't know, what a puppet wrangler is and what a puppet wrangler does?
I wonder, I'm trying to remember what is on my website because I'm sure I wrote it recently ish because I feel like the discussion about what wranglers do has come up a lot in the last few years. And there's never a super great answer. But I tend to tell people that they're the people responsible for especially on-set care maintenance of puppets. And that includes basically like being a liaison to the production for the puppets, at least because many many shows don't have anybody else on set. So it's, if you're lucky, there's a puppet producer and a puppet department and a head of the puppet department, and then you might have builders and wranglers all mixed in. But on a lot of productions, if you're lucky, there is just a wrangler.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it is just the puppeteers.
Right.
Which, if you don't have any wranglers and you need something rigged, then suddenly someone might go like, "Ugh, why do we use puppets?" And you're like, well, it wouldn't have been that hard if you just brought in someone who knew how to affix the prop to the puppet. And instead, you end up with people just going like, "Ah, that was harder than I thought it would be. I thought puppets were easy."
Right.
And it's like, well, they are pretty. They can be easy
If you plan
if
ahead.
you plan.
Yes.
Yeah,
What would you say is the most important tool in a puppet wrangler's toolkit?
that's actually a really good question. The pin cushion, maybe with all the pins in it, just because if for some reason you don't have like your double stick tape or you don't have your scissors, you don't have like, you can do a lot with a very sharp object, whether it's for rigging purposes or if you had to like for cutting purposes or something like that. The thing that I do enjoy about wrangling, or one of the things that I really enjoy about wrangling, is that you're kind of constantly problem solving. I usually tell people it's like kind of being like the MacGyver on set, because you have whatever is in your kit, and you're usually not necessarily you're not necessarily near a shop. If someone says, "Hey, we need the puppet to do this," you're the one responsible for, going through your mental Rolodex and figuring out, based on the tools I have and based on what they need, how can I make it happen? And sometimes it's obvious. You're like, oh, I've done this a million times before. This is how you pin this to that. But every once in a while, you get like a weird one that's like, oh, well, it's silicone. Why can't we just put the tape on it? And it's like, well, nothing sticks to the silicone. So how are we going to rig the phone case to the puppet's hand if it's silicone? And now we can't just use sticky tape like we usually do.
Yeah, well, and I have a question here I was going to ask. You've wrangled for Sesame Street, you've wrangled for Muppets Mayhem, and many other projects as well. Has there ever been a moment where it's like, I don't know how we are going to make this happen, but let's get it done? That you can specifically and legally non-disclosure agreement talk about?
That's also a good question. I think most things I don't feel like have ever been insurmountable. They're just like someone asked a similar question at I did a Comic-Con panel this year and was asked like what's the weirdest thing you've ever had to rig? And I was like, honestly, I don't know. I mean, like I was like, well, there was a lot of weird stuff on crank anchors, but it was just like consistently a lot. Like I still say that that's probably the show that I've done the most day-to-day wrangling and rigging and armaturing than any other show I've done, just because every day you at least had the phones and then there were props and then on top of it there would be like, and then there's a vomit rig. And you'd be like, oh, okay, we have to do all these things. But then Spencer Lott was on the panel and he was like, I remember something. And I went, oh, what was it? And I was definitely there this day. He was assisting and I had to hand him a hot tray of lasagna. It was because it was being used for a family potluck. I think it was like a family potluck kind of dinner meal on Sesame Street. And for whatever reason, it needed to be authentic. It is rare that that puppeteers and wranglers will be handed like a real glass plate with real food in it for a few reasons, including the fact that it's heavy, it's sloshing around, and it's also potentially not only dangerous to the puppeteer, but the puppet. Like if the tomato sauce gets on the puppet, it could be a bad thing with the oils and just everything. It would stain and it would be very hard to clean. And so every once in a while, something like that will happen. But I feel like at this point, it used to be a very like, no, 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 no food, no food, no food. I've encountered more and more real food being used around puppets. Also, I think it's just like, we have a lot of cleaning methods nowadays that were not there before that are like on the go. So there are things you can do. But I don't feel like there's this one thing that I was like, I don't know, I'm never going to figure it out, which might be a cop-out answer. But
No, that's good. What if anything, has doing all this wrangling, taught you about, or how has it informed your puppetry?
well, I mean, for me, I'm always thinking in terms of how something will or won't be like wrangled, I guess. And how knowing how the rigs work or how the puppets are actually like even just knowing something as simple as how the arm rods are actually inserted into the puppet and affixed can help when you're performing because you know how to like handle something that might come up or you might know what the solutions could be for the thing that is being presented to you. So if someone's like, hey, I got this heavy prop, you don't have to go like, oh man, well, we're going to stick it in the hand. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to wield it properly. You go, oh, well, I could just request that the prop is rotted instead, which a lot of puppeteers should know. Every once in a while, people are not paying attention to how things are actually being handed to them.
Yeah.
So, because a lot of time it's like if a wrangler is doing good work, they're handing you something that you don't need to worry about. You just perform. But every once in a while, there'll be something where you might need to throw an idea back towards the wrangling department and just being like, hey, I know we tried it like this, but it's not working. Can we try it like that? Which I have encountered with puppeteers as well. And definitely, it's like best idea should win. It always should.
Yeah.
You should trust your wranglers. If they've done something, there's a good chance they've rigged a lot of things and handed it to you. Sometimes it's not what you need for how you're performing. So it also could inform the other direction as well, where maybe you need to be, it needs to be rigged around a table for some reason. There's no hole. So if you are coming at it from like, well, how would the performer need it? It helps to know both just because you might be able to help inform the conversation for how it's rigged rather than just going like, oh, well, I'm going to be under the table. I'm going to be under the table and I just need a rod.
Yeah.
You might be able to say like, hey, I saw the table. They're not going to cut a hole in it. Can you bend it this way for me? And then you'll get what you need.
Well, even that whole thing, like you said, about how to attach an arm rod, it's like if
Mhm.
you're using a puppet and it's the 23rd take and the arm rod starts getting loose, then you
Mhm.
can fix it yourself as opposed to stopping the production and getting
Yes.
someone over and the puppet's got to go back to the shop and all that stuff. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
if you have that basic knowledge. In 2010, you were in the off-Broadway production of John
Mhm.
Tartaglia's Imagine-Ocean.
Mhm.
Was that another Johnny and the Sprites connection that came through there?
Sort of. So it was technically because I knew Johnny from from the class that I
Yeah.
took, and then Sprites, and Donna Drake, who has now become a good friend. She was Johnny's assistant at one point during the production, but she was also the choreographer. And I always recommend her when people need puppet choreography because she actually has experience doing Muppet style puppet choreography and not necessarily dumbing it down, which kills me when it's always just like left, right, bounce up and down. You're like, ah, everybody can do that. But she would ask for more, and sometimes it wouldn't work out, but like she would know how to ask and try and then modify. But anyway, so she was directing that production. And I knew they were having auditions, and I went out and auditioned. And at least what I was told was that they were very pleasantly surprised by my audition. Not to be like, they didn't expect me to be able to do it, but like, it was a show that needed to be lip synced. So there were no character voices required. It was a pre recorded track, and it was black light. Didn't affect the actual audition necessarily, aside from them trying to make sure that everybody could work well together as a team in tight spaces. But I was told that I earned it, that it wasn't just like oh, we know you, so we're gonna throw you in the cast. I think they didn't at the time know me as much as a performer, which would
Mhm.
make sense because the most they would have known me as was either as like more of a PA type person, or for Donna, I actually hired her to direct a reading of a piece not puppet related at all. That would have been kind of in an overlap of that window, and so they wouldn't have known me as necessarily a puppeteer, and I got to kind of show myself to them that way.
Excellent. And how many shows did you do with Imagine Ocean?
I mean, I did the whole off-Broadway run.
Mhm.
Sorry, it was a lot of shows.
Yeah, yeah.
But there were like on and off periods where we wouldn't have that many shows. There were like some, because New York, there are times of the year that are just more dead than others for New York theater, and especially theater and for kids theater. So there were like some days that had 3 show days, and then there were some times of the year that only had like the 4 show weekend shows, more or less. The evening shows surprisingly were not that popular at the time during the week. So when we started, I think it was like a 5 show schedule that went down and went up over time.
And would you say, I mean, I always think this is the case, and I know I've said this on the show many times before, but doing something like that many times,
Mhm.
like really helps you work on your puppetry.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially because it was the only thing for me that it didn't explicitly help with was that my puppet did not have rods. Most of the puppets did not. So it helped me a lot with my lip sync, but and like trying to portray as much as possible character through just a head.
Yeah.
But I didn't have any rods to practice with, which would have been great hours to put in doing that as well,
Yeah.
unfortunately. So,
Well, it's funny. That show is, I mean, I'm sure you know this, but I'm
mhm.
just saying for the listeners, that show is still running in a theme park in San.
Mhm.
My friend just sent me a picture. It
Oh,
was
really?
like, hey, dude, this is still going here.
Okay.
So that's pretty cool to be in
Mhm.
there on the ground floor of that production.
Yeah. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
it did we also went on to be Splash and Bubbles
Yeah.
for Henson, which we had nothing to do with. But
Yeah, no, that's
but it did.
it's had
Yeah.
a cool life. In 2011, you started a production company.
Hmm.
Can you talk about kind of what the decision was to, were you working on your own projects and you're like, we need to start a company with this? Or how did that evolve? Because I feel sometimes as puppeteers, we're more into the puppetry. We don't think about the business side of things. So I'd love to know how this came about.
Yeah, so the production company started because I had a show get into the New York Musical Festival, or was New York Musical Theater Festival at the time, and that year was this rogue year where you had to run payroll, and it also was a year that you could apparently get your equity card from them, which was weird. And So I started the company because I knew that I was going to de facto be like the executive producer for the show. And I wanted to make sure that we were running the show production on the up and up. Once I did that, I realized that I did like producing. I'd kind of been forced to do it when I was in college because I was directing major, so you had to produce your own shows. Out in the real world, I like to say like I like building sandboxes and like inviting people to play in them. And when you are officially a producer, you're able to help with that in some way.
Excellent. So, and what was, and you started it with somebody else, right? Do you have a partner in this?
Yes, so it was originally my mom was one of the partners, and my Chinese mother, who I say is like my godmother essentially. And the three of us started the company as a multi generational women led theater company, essentially. That eventually also like we produce things that are not necessarily theater oriented either. It's at this point, I feel like most production companies worth their salt tend to just follow where the opportunities are.
Mhm.
At least for stuff that is more artist driven, if you're multi hyphenate, you kind of just sometimes the medium is not where you started.
And was this something that, like, did you have to learn all the steps on how to do this, how to create this company and get it up and payroll, like you mentioned, and all that stuff?
Yes and no. Yes, I did have to do it, but the no is one of the best things you can learn to do as a producer is bring the right team in for to help you where you don't know. So if you have gaps in your knowledge, either hire someone, get a consultant, or ask. Just ask. So the first year, we basically I knew that we were going to have to run the payroll, and I knew that it was something that my mom had a lot of experience in because of my dad's business as a doctor. She ended up de facto doing it. But this was for theater, it involved unions. So I knew that I could essentially study up, but that I would want to make sure I didn't make any mistakes. So I brought in an associate producer who could help kind of with like some of the more line producery sort of stuff, like making sure that whatever we needed to do that had to do with the unions was being done exactly as they needed it to be done. And to me, it was worth every penny of like that being part of our budget, just because I don't like getting in trouble with the government. And I did not want my first try out to then be something that would be any sort of issue in terms of payment for anybody. And there's a reason unions exist. It was very low pay. Like everything was still very low pay, but I wanted to make sure everybody got everything that they needed to get out of it.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, let's talk about. I know one of your super passion projects, and that is the world of Rescue Rue.
Mhm.
And the inspiration for this show kind of came from somebody special. Can you talk about where it came from?
Yes, I can always talk about her. So Rue is my rescue dog. I adopted her in 2012, and I very quickly was like, "Wow, where did you come from? I wish that I knew your whole story," because she basically didn't have any story before they picked her up on the street. There was like nothing really to be, typical like rescue dog story where there nobody had brought her into the shelter. It was just she was found on the street. And I was finding that she was helping me come out of my shell. I was really enjoying like just having a dog of my own after growing up with dogs that were family dogs. And she was changing my life for such good that I was like, what's my medium of choice? Musical theater. So I started writing a book, like a musical book, that was her story based on like a short story version that I had written. And that eventually I took that with like dummy lyrics. At the time, I did not consider myself a lyricist. I do write lyrics. At the time, I was like my final frontier. I was scared of. So I had dummy lyrics and a book, and I sent it to the New York Children's Theater Festival, which was a very short-lived children's theater festival in New York City, also co-run by John Tartaglia. And I submitted and I said, "Hey, if you guys take it, I promise it'll be ready for the festival." And when I heard back from them, it was like I adopted her in February. I started writing it, and then like the fall was when they were like, "Hey, so we're really surprised to say our adjudicators liked this a lot. So if you really promise it'll be done, we will let you in, but it has to be done." And I was like, "Okay." And then I went looking for collaborators to help with the music and songs, and we finished it. Like, it was probably the fastest I've ever written a full show before, and it ended up being at the New York Children's Festival, which then we got lucky that someone from the New York Musical Festival came to see it and said, "Hey, we have a show pulling out of a slot at our smallest space. Would you be interested in doing it again?" And I was like, "If we can do some edits, yes." So I talked to the team. We were like, "Okay." And I had a number in my head of how many people had to return from the cast, because re-rehearsing of the full show and putting the money and effort back into a full rehearsal was not going to work. And I barely hit the minimum of who I didn't need to replace. And then we did it at Nymph. And it was like just a really whirlwind of like a year and like some change between like starting and then doing two festivals. And then I kept working on it. And now there's a sequel.
Right.
So,
Let me just ask you. I know you
mhm.
mentioned violin. Do you play other instruments as well?
Officially, not really, but I dabble in stuff. Like, I got to a certain point when I was like out of college, where I was like, I think I'd like to try guitar. So I did. And I can dabble enough on a piano that I can, like, if you hand me sheet music, I could probably like plunk it out. That's one that is still on my list. I'd love to learn how to like really play piano. Other than that, the only one that I studied formally for a long time was violin.
Well, and when you're writing a song like for Rescue
Mhm.
Rue, are you working it out on a keyboard, or how are you working it out?
So
Just
I usually work with collaborators who are like the number one person on music side. But I also work music first and lyric first, depending on the situation, depending on the song. So on Runaway Rue, I worked with one collaborator, Angela Parrish, who's fantastic. And she and I kind of like, depending on what was needed, would do one or the other first. And I definitely sent her some lyrics where I had a melody in my head, and I would just usually I like to see what the other person kind of comes back with when I do that, because something really cool might happen. And sometimes it would be like she would send me a melody and be like, "Here's the melody for the song." And there's at least one song where she sent me something that I was like, "This is not at all what I thought it would be, but let's see what happens." And like it was one of the easiest lyrics that I wrote, just because it was a very inspiring music for the words that had to come. So,
yeah. So I know in 2021 the show played off Broadway. What was the sort of development like between those initial performances at the festivals to 2021?
there were a lot of ups and downs. There were a bunch of readings, because readings are really important in kind of getting a sense of where your show is and what needs to happen with it, especially when you're doing musical theater. For puppet stuff, it's really important also to get a visual sense of what's happening. So we did at least one workshop as well, which was more of like a mini production, to get a sense of like, visually, is the storytelling working in the direction we're going or not? And then right before the pandemic, we were planning on doing potentially like a off-Broadway run. And then the pandemic happened. And I went, well, there's no theater happening right now for a while. So we spent like a year or so going, I don't know. And then I was like, well, what if we film it? So we ended up filming, or like planning to do a filmed production that we filmed in like October of 2021. That is still currently in post, for a variety of reasons, but it's in post. It'll be out soon. And that production flipped into the off Broadway production that ran that winter, 21 to 22. And the only thing I'll say, for we thought at that point that the pandemic was coming to a close of some kind, not a close, but like winding down in some of the worries that like theater was having. But if you were in New York in December of 2021, that was when the Omicron spike happened. And like the theater community was kind of ravaged one by one by one with each show. So we held out as long as we could. We ended up taking a break over what would have been our biggest couple of weeks for the holidays, because I just was not willing to put my crew on stage, and I figured audiences didn't really want to come out. It was not the right time. So we were able to break for 2 weeks. The theater, I was the Daryl Roth Theater, who was also a co-producer on the project. They were willing to let us extend by 2 weeks on the back end to compensate. And all of our performers went away. And when we came back, I made the executive decision with the blessing of the cast to do the show fully masked. Because I figured if their puppetry skills were as good as I thought they were, that it shouldn't affect the storytelling to the
Mhm.
degree that if you don't see any faces in maybe a standard theater production, you might be like, oh, I feel like I'm missing something. But if a puppeteer is good enough, yes, it is an extra enhancement. That's why Avenue Q worked so well. But if their puppetry is really good, you shouldn't really be missing anything. And so we just finished out the show like that. And that's our archival version, like our archival recording of the show is everybody masked, which I was hoping we'd be able to do unmasked by then.
Yeah.
Alas, it was not. But I at least felt like we got through a very hard time in the theater by doing that. And it was worth it for that nobody else got sick at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah. Well, it's a nice little time capsule of
Yes.
of that wonderful time.
Hmm.
In 2023, you debuted the sequel, which
Hmm.
was Runaway Rue, a follow-up production where Rue moves to Hollywood. But this
Hmm.
also coincided with your move to Hollywood, right?
Yes. I would say the secret of Rescue Rue is that even though there is a narrator character who is ostensibly me, I am actually Rue. So in the first show, I like to say is about her finding her happily forever after, or like happy new beginning. We say in the show because all endings are new beginnings. And the sequel is essentially her figuring out what forever family is. And after I started spending more time on the West Coast and eventually was like, I think this is home now. I definitely processed that through writing Runaway Rue in many ways.
Yeah, and we'll go back to Runaway Rue, but were you just getting more jobs out here? Is that what was happening?
So yes and no. So when I first came out, I was one of many people that stayed in Liz Hara's apartment as like an extra. She has one room that was like a rotating cast of characters, and so I sublet it at one point while I was just kind of figuring, well, things were kind of quiet in New York at that point. And I was like, I've never tried the West Coast. And honestly, I'd never tried anywhere other than New York because I went there for college and I just stayed. And I was hoping to kind of foray more into the directing, producing sort of stuff and the writing stuff that I do. So I was like, well, maybe I should give like LA a try. And I ended up meeting my now husband after a few months of being out in LA. He's also from the East Coast though, so he's a transplant as well. And someone said to me, I did a puppet playlist when they did Prince, like the one, I think they only did one puppet playlist out here, which was a program that they did in New York, which is like pairs puppeteers doing songs from certain artists along with musical artists doing their renditions of that same art, the musical artist in questions pieces as an evening. And I spoke to someone on the phone. They were like, "Well, maybe your 20s you were in New York. Maybe in your 30s you'll be in Los Angeles." And I was like, that's interesting." I so far it has come true. So yeah, I ended up out here and kind of just the once I relinquished myself over and was like, you know what? The puppet world is where I come from. I do love it. I should just be open to all the opportunities that come. More and more like puppet opportunities started coming through. I worked at Swazzle. I ended up on Crank Yankers after that. I did a little bit on Kidding, not a lot. I did a couple days on Kidding. And then it just kind of like snowballed and eventually I ended up at Muppets. And I was like, this all feels like everything started feeling kind of right. So I was
Yeah.
like, okay, maybe I like to say I kept my stakes in the ground in New York for a very long time. And then eventually I was like, I think more work is coming in LA and I can still go back if there are things that come up in New York, which is essentially also what happened with Rescue Rue. When that was happening and it made sense to do it in New York, I went back.
Yeah.
And I feel like nowadays a lot of people are very decentralized, even if they are based in one place. There's a lot of travel for work happening.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, I just gave myself over to the fact that like your heart can kind of be in more than one place and that LA might be home now.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Well, I don't want to drop Runaway Rue completely. You talked about how the development process of Runaway Rue was very short. The initial one from writing your book to
Mhm.
putting it up.
Yep.
And I know that you put up Runaway Rue at the Hollywood Fringe Festival.
Mhm.
How was the development time between those? Coming up with the idea and then putting it up.
That one was also pretty short. I tend to feel like most projects, if your heart is in the right place and you're inspired, they can come together pretty quickly. You just have to be like running at the target. So that one, I had reached out to Angela Parrish, essentially what would have been like a month before the pandemic, and said, "Hey, I think we might like. Would you do a trial with me for a song?" Because I knew that I had the first version of a book for Runaway Rue at that point was like outlined, and I knew that there were certain things like a song about Hollywood. I knew that there was definitely going to be like a beat that would have to do with Rue and a want song. Like I knew that there were certain things in a musical that would be in it. So she did a trial, and I went, I think you're my collaborator. But then since the pandemic was happening, it took another 6 or 7 months before I was like, hey, so I signed up for a reading at like the there's a musical theater company based out of North Hollywood that is called New Musicals Inc. And I had taken a course with them and then signed up to be like, to do potentially like be in the slots that they have available for like, musical readings or et cetera. And I said, hey, I got a slot for January. It's for a digital reading. Do you think we can finish the show? And we very quickly like pulled it together and we're like, okay, well, here's the draft. And whatever it is, like, I'm a big fan of just vomit out something and show it to people. You will find the show in the rewrites if you didn't find it the first time, which usually you don't. So we did that reading, and between the collaborating with her and the actual reading, I went, I think this might be a show. The sequel might actually be a show and it might stand on its own feet. So we ended up continuing development on it and doing a couple more readings over the next year, I guess, before I went, hey, Hollywood Fringe is basically just sign up and you get to do it. So, do you think we could do it? And she was like, well, if you want to do it, let's do it. And so it was probably 2021. We did readings that were digital. The following year, when we had the full cast together for Rescue Rue off Broadway, I tacked in an equity reading with that cast, plus or minus one or two people, because I went, well, we have everybody quarantined together essentially. They're all working together. They will probably be comfortable together. And then later, I signed up for Fringe and I just went, we'll just present it. Whatever it is, we'll know if it works on its feet enough to edit it, because I don't think you can write, especially with puppets, again, they're a visual medium. You can't write a puppet show or a puppet musical and only work it in readings,
Hmm.
because even with not I mean, if you're just doing a regular musical, it doesn't have puppets. You end up with something that works really well in reading format or like radio, because it has to for the reading. But if you have dance elements, if you have visual storytelling elements, you need to be able to see it on its feet in some form of a workshop before you lock the script and
Yeah.
like pursue licensing or pursue other theater companies. So for me, that's always just been part of the process, because that's what you do when you do plays or musicals. That's what we did for us as well.
And is Rescue Rue and Runaway Rue, are those scripts locked, or do you still tinker with them? And
So Runaway Rue, I've been in a round of tinkering, because officially the last draft that was seen was the version that was, well, actually that's not true. I was going to say the version that was at Fringe was the last version, but there wasn't. There was a half length version that we did at Skirball for their puppetry festival this year, but that is kind of its own beast, because
right.
it was meant to be 45, it had to be 45 minutes or under. So that version, the expanded version of the short version, is the current like semifinal version of Runaway Rue. There were edits that were made to make it work in a short format that honestly would work in a longer one. So that's what happened. But Rescue Rue is technically locked for the time being because it's actually licensable.
Oh, okay, great.
The
Yeah.
the company plays for new audiences, which is the children's theater company. They're like producing their licensing wing is has the licensing for Rescue Rue. So technically, Rescue Rue is at least locked as of current
Yeah.
draft. That said, they're lovely people. So if I ever went to them and was like, "Hey, we edited it. Can I fix it?" I'm sure they would be happy to take the edit. But that one is technically locked.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I think you've given just in your descriptions of the process of putting these up, you've given some advice. But if a puppeteer came up to you and said, "Hey, I have an idea for a show that I want to put up in a theater way, not necessarily a
Mhm.
TV show or something," what advice would you give them to get started anyway?
I mean, it would honestly be just do it. I know that sometimes there are barriers and it can cost money depending on what you're trying to do, but getting people in your living room with scripts doesn't usually cost more than giving them some food, um, or saying thank you. So I've found that like a lot of the stuff that I've developed goes through at least one round that is just like saying to your friends, "Hey, I have an idea. Can you come and read it?" And you can usually get a sense of if it might be something if you just do that because you'll get the feedback immediately. You just have to learn how to decipher between prescriptive feedback and like actual just reactions because a lot of people sometimes people will go, "Oh, this is what you should do,"
Right.
and sometimes they're right. I mean, sometimes it's just different. Sometimes it's different directions.
Yeah.
And so in those environments, you just have to understand who you're inviting into the room and know how to kind of suss through what is said in the feedback sessions.
Excellent. And just finally on this, you performed at the festivals in New York and then the Hollywood Fringe Festival out here. Do you
Mhm.
think festivals are a good avenue for like puppeteers who have a show to look into anyway?
Yes, but yes, it is. If you know what you're getting into them for. So, because they do cost money
Hmm.
depending on how many people and how big it is. So, you have to know going into it how much you're willing to lose because 9 times out of 10 at least, probably 9.99 times out of 10, they're a losing money endeavor that you have to be open with yourself about whether it's feasible to do it that way and what you want to get out of it. So for let's say Runaway Rue as an example, explicitly we were doing it not to like pitch the show to people but to see what we had on its feet. I knew that it would probably lose money. It's fringe. There's no way we were going to ever command prices to help pay everybody back. But we mitigated the cost as much as we could in putting it up in terms of limiting the costumes and limiting the set. Because for us, the goal was the script, was making sure we had something that felt resonant, that felt like it was theatrical, that worked, that like the narrative followed and worked and made sense, and that the show, as much as possible, could stand on its own and not just be a sequel that you had to see the first one to see and understand. So for us, the goal was not, quote, to sell it essentially, um, but to do the other stuff developmentally that we felt we needed. And I think in that we were successful. We also got some great audience feedback, which we also were doing it for just to see if the audiences liked it. But it was a good way to go, "Oh, yeah, that character isn't clear." Because in the first show, they're super clear, but now we have to figure out a way to re explain and introduce who they are without backtracking and making it really exposition heavy. So stuff like that we were able to work out by doing it. Um, but yeah, it's festivals can be great and they can also be really great ways to find community. Like it was really cool seeing that there is a theater community that exists in LA.
Yeah.
It is hard to find sometimes,
Yeah.
but it's the tough part is just it does cost money and it's your time and it just depends on how you're able to invest in that moment for yourself.
Will we be seeing any more stories from Rue in the future?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. I can't help myself. And also so I've been sitting on a couple of ideas that I wanted to do that were in the Rescue universe. Um, but Angela Parrish, unfortunately, her dog passed away recently, and I said, "Well, can we write him into the next one?" And she said yes. So I would like to write another one so that we can put Zappa in it.
Yeah.
But it's because it's something that's already happened with the first Rescue Roo. Squish is based on a real dog as well. That was the costume designer's dog, who was a one-eyed, one-tooth dog that was was an old lady dog when she was adopted, and unfortunately, she's also no longer with us. But it's really lovely that these animals can still kind of live on and help us, even though they're gone. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, excellent. Well, we'll keep an eye out for that.
Mhm.
So, another project I want to ask you about, in which you were the adapter and director of, is Ludo's Broken Bride. Can you tell us a little bit about that show?
Sure, yeah. So that was one that I saw Ludo play a concert in New York City in like 2008, maybe. Heard their concept album, Broken Bride, first time beginning to end, and went, wow, this should be on stage. And then I looked it up online and went, oh, some other people have had the same idea. But me being a little bit crazy, I messaged them and I said, hey, I'd really love the rights to do this for the Shortened Attention Span Festival in New York. And it ended up just being like another right place, right time, where at the time one of the band members from Ludo lived in Brooklyn, and I actually was able to meet with him. And we ended up I put the show up in its short format and was like from the beginning kind of gunning to maybe expand it into being more of a proper like stage adaptation of their rock opera. And for me it was always, there would be puppets in it, there just would be, because it is a story about a man that literally goes from the beginning of time to end of time in order to save his wife from dying in a car crash that in 1989. So I was like, well, time travel and zombies and dinosaurs, it feels like there would be puppets in it. And it ended up being something that I circled back on periodically. We did it at Antfest, which is like Ars Nova's short festival that they do every year in June. And then we did it at the New York Musical Theater Festival in 2016 as well, in an expanded version that was essentially a jukebox musical version of the show. And though the New York Times called it a, like, I think, a beautiful mess, um, they basically gave us like a like thumbs up for like trying to do something big. They were like, we see what you're trying to do, and we were like, yes, that is exact. Like, because sometimes you need to swing big, and it goes back to what I've been saying about developing things for stage, especially if it's visual. You need to be able to do it and see it and know if it works. And with Broken Bride, it's just like the story itself has it has really big themes about love, lost, life, and like where what you would do for other people. And the themes are so big, and the like music is all like, it's early 2000s alt rock, kind of like that kind of punkish like alt rock alternative stuff. It's which is also, just as someone who grew up in like the early 2000s, it like hits me in the right place.
Hmm.
I just It's one of those shows that like I know it's meant to be somewhere, and it definitely has puppets. Uh, and at some point, we will put it on a bigger stage when it's ready. So,
Excellent.
yeah.
Well, as we mentioned, you are a director, a writer, and a producer, and a wrangler,
Mhm.
and a puppeteer. But I wanted to talk about a couple shows. There was a show you were a puppet consultant on, and that was
Mhm.
Blippi's Treehouse on
Mhm.
Amazon.
Yes.
Can you talk about your role on that production?
Yes. So I had crossed paths with Kristen McGregor before through the Children's Media Association, I think originally, which is a plug for the Children's Media Association if you're looking into wanting to be a part of a group that is into children's media. They're like a they work across different verticals. So I like usually say they're like a transvertical group as opposed to within one that can help connect people. Anyway, so I had spoken to her about producing, and she reached back out and was like, "Hey, do you have your like puppet resume?" And I was like, "Sure." And then it was like right around when Crank Yankers was ending, and I knew a little bit about Blippi, but not a lot. And it was one of those sets where everybody was absolutely lovely, and the director had puppet experience as well. Was Shannon Flynn, who I knew from Sesame Street, who also has a theater background, which is also awesome. And the catch was that it was like a props department who hadn't worked with puppets before. So I ended up helping when I was on set, kind of like somewhere between wrangling and helping with like advising on, oh, here we have these goggles, and they'd be something that like you couldn't just rig to the puppet because there was nothing on them that you could pin into, nothing. So I could say, hey, if you just add a strap here and a tab here, and then we could pin it, then I kind of helped with that sort of stuff, just making sure that if they needed something, I could help kind of connect the dots for them.
Excellent. And another one that you served as director, writer, and supervising producer on was the Reading League's Reading Buddies on PBS. And was this your first? It may not be because I may have the timeline mixed here. But was this the first time you were directing puppets for camera, or did that happen some other time?
So it was my first time directing multicam for
Okay.
puppets on
Yeah.
set, in the kind of environment that was like more TV oriented. I'd done some like short film things before then, and had done. I'm trying to like in my timeline. I'm like, I think Hedge Hearts was before then. So I did that for Liz Hara. I directed like a short puppet film that I say short film. It was still like 30 minutes, so it
Yeah.
was like a full episode of something. But that was more filmic. So it was single camera, and it was much more like I was talking to the DP about like what the angles would look like, and we were trying to like tell storytelling visually. With Reading Buddies, it was a ton of material, and the curriculum was extremely forward and everything. So it had to be perfect. And I give like major props to Brendan and Andrea, who are the creators of the show, who also were like the lead writers. I did like a segment on one like season, and just for their like leadership style and they just made me feel very much like I was a trusted collaborator for them, and like gave them eyes essentially for that production. As director, I was serving as like their eyes to make sure that everything looked all right and that they didn't miss anything that may have been important. We were going at, I mean, when I say it was a breakneck pace, some of the days were like an absurd number of pages, just because we were crashing through like curriculum stuff that was very like they had the ability to use a teleprompter, and it was just very curriculum heavy. So there were some days where it really was like we'd be doing like 20, 30 pages, 40 pages of just material that was not for the stuff that was more of the like sketches.
Mhm.
Like those things we took a little bit more time and care. The first season that I did with them, the added challenge was that there was a switcher but no quad view of anything. So if you know, like from the director side or from like the producer side behind the camera, usually if there is multicam, you are given what is the feed that is being seen for the switcher, which is the person doing the live cutting. But then you also can see the other cameras. Like you can see what is currently in the other camera's viewpoint, just so that you have a sense of it. And then if you want to say like, oh, take to camera A, you can do that. The first season they were not at WCNY was doing the best that they could, and they just could not give me that. So they only gave me the feed that the switcher had because it was the best that they could do. And it meant that we would, in order, like we couldn't really do any camera moves in like within what we were shooting, because it meant needing to trust that stuff was going to end up kind of needing to be where it was. Like we couldn't reposition a camera and know that where it was going would be good. Especially added on top of it, it's like you have puppets that are in scenes, which means the eye focus could be completely off from one camera to the next. So before we would shoot, I would ask to scroll through all the cameras so I could adjust each of them a little bit if that needed to be adjusted. And then we would shoot based on whatever my notes were for, which is normal for like live cutting. And then I would just hope that it worked out. And that if they needed to do anything in the edit, they could. The second year I went back, I said, please, 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 like I really need to be able to see all the cameras. And they did it, and it was amazing. Because it was just really nice to be able to see everything. The second year we were also like, I mean, the crew was great both years, but it was a lot of people returning. And we had a little bit more of an ability to try doing like pushing in and try doing repositioning cameras in the middle of takes. And it was a great experience, but it was like so much easier when I was able to see everything that was actually going on.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, in 2023, you worked on the Muppets Mayhem. And I know that wrangling is such a huge job. And I think you maybe kind of answered a little bit of this, but do you learn about puppets from handling these legendary, because you did this on Sesame Street too.
Mhm,
You are holding legendary,
mhm.
world famous characters. Is there a bit of a learning experience with that too? Just seeing how these puppets that have endured so long are made, are built.
Yeah, you definitely do. I mean, with every project, you encounter puppets that you're like, wow, this is amazing. And then you go, oh, that's how that works for a lot of things. You just learn by doing.
Hmm.
I also, I felt I was very happy that I came somewhat trained because of my history with Sesame Street and the people that I encountered when I was starting even at Johnny and the Sprites. Like, I have known Laura McLean since I was 18, and she is amazing. She still is amazing, and like the people that were teaching me on the very front end were people that also were trained by the same people that do, like, everybody came from the same place, basically, from back when Henson was all one thing. The Muppets were all under the same banner
Yeah.
as like Sesame Street. So when I ended up on the West Coast, I at least had some background, which was kind of nice. But I still definitely learned a lot. I worked under Jane Goodnick when I started at Muppets, and I had not encountered like Miss Piggy before. Like, she was gone by the time I started at Henson. The Muppets were gone.
Hmm.
And so I was still learning about how to handle and like how to rig or not rig to different puppets that I would not have ever had the need to encounter before,
Yeah.
which was cool.
Well, and to top it off, you were nominated for an Emmy for The Muppets
Hmm.
Mayhem and Sesame Street, and then you
Hmm.
won for Sesame
Hmm.
Street. So that's gotta be a lot of awesomeness.
Yeah, it was cool. It was I like to say I never made the list. I never made the list, never made the list. And then I made the list like during the pandemic. So the funny part was, it was basically, I got a text message from someone that was like, I think you just won an Emmy. And it was the year that there were no Emmys. I mean, it was like there was a digital, they did like some, it was like one of the last years that was still not the Children and Family Emmys.
Hmm.
It was still on the regular, like, it was, I think, for the 50th. So it was like a two-way tie, and there were three three shows nominated. But it was weird because I just got like a text message. It was like, "Hey, I think you won." I was like, "Really?" Because there was nothing to watch or to go to. So it
Yeah.
was just kind of like, huh. And then within another year or two, like, the Children and Family Emmys were separated, and I finally got to like go for Muppets Mayhem
Yeah.
because I wanted to like experience it not working the event. So
And how was that? Well, how was the experience of going to the Emmys?
I mean, it was cool. I was very pregnant at the time, but it was nice to like go and like just get to kind of see, like, to experience. I just wanted to experience something different. I was hoping we would win. It was probably the of the shows I've done. Like I said, Cranky Years is probably the hardest with like constant rigging. Mayhem to that point was the hardest I had done in terms of tracking costumes. So like, as far as styling goes, like, if we're because my Emmy is technically, it's like shared with everybody from Sesame Street who worked at the shop and worked on set, and it was in cost. They said I'm a costumer, and I'm like, well, that's not really true, is it? But if you're talking about costume and styling, you're like judging it in that way. I was like, well, Mayhem kind of was it. There was like tons of costumes, which is not usual for tracking for when you're wrangling. There's some costume changes usually, but not like multiple days within an episode that you're tracking costumes. It was just funny that I was like, oh, one time I was like, this, we did do a lot of wrangling, and then I went to Sesame Street, and I went, oh, okay, well, I'm glad for everybody else, that because we all knew each other, so you can't be that upset.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
And is your Emmy displayed prominentely
It
in your
is
house?
in our kitchen. It has a little crown on it that my niece made for my son. That's his name is Emmett, so I thought it was funny. It just says like Emmett on it, and it's sitting on the little globe. So it's there. It's like it's in a prominent place, but it feels hidden. So I
Yeah.
don't feel like I'm showing it off too much.
I gotcha. I gotcha. I wanted to ask too, kind of the last sort of project to ask about. I have some other questions, but Monica's Mixing Bowl,
Hmm.
because you were also a showrunner on that
Hmm.
one. Can you talk about how you got involved with that and the job of show running a puppet show?
Yeah, so I got involved with it through a mutual friend connected me with Monica of Monica's Mixing Bowl, and she wanted to do a kids cooking show with puppets. And when I first met with her, I went, other people have tried to do this, and this was before. This is where I would go like, if only like you learn as you get older, like like having confidence in terms of pitching or reaching out to people. I like kind of wasn't there at the time. I said, people have tried this and it doesn't usually work. I said, but I have an idea of how maybe ours could work. If you want me to kind of, because I joined as a puppet designer, really. But I said, but I like producing and I really like your idea. Like, I really liked what she wanted to do because her main angle was let's make friends with food. So the idea was that it demystified allergies and dietary restrictions for kids and families because she had experienced caring for a child that had a severe allergy, and she saw how it kind of made other people nervous, like nervous to have the kid over, nervous to have the kid in class, and she wanted that to not be a thing anymore. So I went, oh, I really like it because it's like a tolerance and understanding angle. It's not just about the recipes and making the food. So I ended up coming on board as a writer and helping her kind of develop the concept. And every step of the way, I was just like, if I am pushing too much, like this is your project, like push back, it's okay. And we ended up kind of co-developing it into what it became, which was much more of a narrative focused show that could have the food elements in it, where food or the recipe or whatever the issue at hand was could be solved with the food as part of the storytelling, but it wasn't just about let's wash our hands, let's cut the food, let's mix it up. So it went from being a procedural to being a narrative. I still believe in it. I still want it to happen. Sometimes I still think that the other shows that did food didn't do that, or didn't focus on that as much. And so it just kind of like ended up being like we did a proof of concept that was a single episode that was the original, was a little more of the original version of what she thought the show would be, which was included more of a procedural in it, where we saw everything happening up until the oven because that was dangerous. And then there was a music video that happened during that cooking, and then at the end everybody shared food. One of the characters has a severe gluten allergy, so they end up making food together. But then we watched it and watched it back, and we kind of looked at it with a critical eye and went like, hey, so Monica's this like Mary Poppins character, kind of seems like it's not like something's not clicking. And so we redeveloped it with Monica a little bit more just not perfect. Like she was a little bit more wacky and weird, which was more in tune with what Monica wanted. Monica, like she is a playful person. So it was like instead of it being like, wow, she's magical and everything happens perfectly, it was a little bit more like, oh, I made a mess and of the
Mhm.
kitchen and we'll have to clean up together. And that we then did another kind of like pilot series proof of concept that was interstitials, that we did four like mini episodes, like 5-minute mini episodes and a music video, because I went, well, if we're loading into a space, we're not just shooting in someone's kitchen in Harlem. We're loading into a space, we're making an actual kitchen set. It is not going to be worth us doing one day of shooting. So we were in there for a week, and we basically were like, how much can we film in a week, and came up with a number. And then those are what you can see online today, which itself is also like I learned a lot. I've learned a lot since then because that's we filmed those about I think over 10 years ago. But what was really cool was also just getting to like essentially be showrunner, which meant that I had a bit of a creative hand in it, but then also had a more like logistical hand in it,
Mhm.
which for me that's like the ideal is being able to kind of balance. Like for me it works, I like the how it works for my brain. Like I like that I can help problem solve creatively, but also problem solve like the logistical. Well, we need 5 people on set, but we can only afford 4. How do we make this work? Oh well, we can save money over here by doing this, and we can also switch the schedule around so we can make it make it work better for what we need. You don't always get those opportunities unless you make them, usually. Yeah.
Awesome. I love that. Well, as a director, What traits should a puppeteer have that would make you more likely to cast them in a
Ooh.
production?
Collaboration first and foremost, honestly, like someone that is truly an open-hearted collaborator, because puppets, it's like improv is like team sports. It's all team sports. The best idea should win. Everybody should be working towards the same goal. So if you have someone that is just out for themselves, while they might get a laugh, it's not necessarily going to bring up the whole team. So you need to find people that work well together. And that's usually, especially for puppets, what I'm looking for, I think. I mean,
Eh,
that's what I'm looking for. I mean, to be honest, that's what I'm looking for on any team. But puppets inherently is collaborative. So if someone doesn't know how to play well with others, it can be very difficult.
Yeah. Well, because I mentioned this before, I do want to talk about it. Your website.
Hmm.
Usually, when I have somebody on the show, I do a lot of poking around, looking for other interviews,
Hmm.
trying to find, questions to ask and stuff. And your website was such a great resource of all the stuff you've done. Do you update your own website? Like, do you keep it up and running yourself?
I do. I hate my website. I feel like it doesn't. I feel like I try because I'm multi hyphenate. I haven't quite figured out the like how to sell yourself properly on it, but that's why I updated it the way that I did because I was just like, well, if someone's looking for me, my hope is that they can find what they need to find.
Hmm.
And if it existed on multiple, let's say, like multiple websites, then it might get confusing. But also, sometimes it's nice to just search someone and see, like, oh, Stacy, director. That's what they do, and then that's the end.
I don't know. I thought it was really great.
Thank you.
All your information there, and you have so many great video examples, which is where you can
Mhm.
click and see the video. This is what I'm looking for. And I just kind of asked that because I think sometimes puppeteers don't think about that.
Uh-huh.
Puppeteers like, oh, I'm not going to necessarily have a website.
I do have at least one friend who I had to be like, you need a website. People don't think you exist. Like, you need a website. You're a
Yeah.
builder. You know what you're doing. Something, anything. Because then if I recommend to you, they can just look you up. Which, I mean, honestly, it might come from having been behind the table and knowing that if I look someone up, I'm much more likely to hire them if I can find what I'm looking for without needing to ask.
Yeah.
So if I'm like, especially for performers, if I oh well, I know that I'm hiring a dog character that's a little quirky and they're older. If I can find anything that gives me resonance to that just by searching YouTube, by searching your website, by searching, and it's easy, then I'm more likely to at least bring you in for the audition, if not just hire you.
Yeah.
Whereas if I search someone and I'm like, oh man, I can only find like one video that they recorded 10 years ago and I can tell they can act, but I can't tell anything else, then I'm less likely to hire just because it makes it harder to know who you are.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Perfect. All right. That's great advice. Get on your
Mhm.
websites there, puppeteers.
Mhm.
Well, Muppets Mayhem was not the last project you worked on with the Muppets. You've worked on something very recently that very many people are very excited about. What can you tell us about working on the upcoming? Well, I guess we can say it because it's announced the upcoming Muppet Show.
Yeah, it was really awesome. As like a kid who totally watched reruns of I'm young enough that I watched reruns of the Muppet Show when I was growing up, but not that young anymore. I used to watch it with my parents. Like we would do TV dinners and watch the Muppet Show and Muppets Tonight. Being on a set where you're like, wow, this is the Muppet Show. This is the Muppet Show. There's no questioning what we're doing right now. It was really cool. It was just like, and it was a really, really awesome collaborative environment. It was, as I mentioned before, one of the like few instances where there really was a shop on set. I got to be the Muppet workshop supervisor on the set, which was also, it was really awesome being trusted with that position. And it, it, the work that was being done between props, costumes, and puppets was it just I had not felt that in a while on a set. And there was just like open collaboration, open like, hey, what about this? Do you oh we need some glue. Here's some glue. Or it would be like, do you guys think this looks all right? And we would be able to actually like talk or go, oh, is this to scale? And then you could just go walk over and grab Kermit's hand and like show the props department whether or not the thing that they need is the scale that they need. So it made everything a little bit easier and a little bit more fun just because it wasn't Oh, well, you get sent puppets from some faraway shop and then they're there. And then you get sent props from the trailer that is a certain distance away, or the costumes department is operating completely separate. It was everybody in the same room, like quite literally in the same room, able to just interface, which was pretty fantastic. On top of the fact that it was the Muppet Show, which just added a lot of extra like nostalgia factor and like awesomeness factor for the whole thing.
It was also, at least from what I heard, because Russ Walco, who's been on the show
Mhm,
before, worked on it
mhm.
as well. For like Russ and yourself, it was a big project because they only shot for a week or a little bit over a week. There was a couple days over a week, but you were working in the shop for several weeks before
Mhm.
and weeks after as well,
Yeah,
right?
it was just a lot. I think I can say like without getting in the way. There were a lot of puppets involved,
Yeah,
just because it's the Muppet Show. So historically, there's it's more than three puppets on stage.
right.
So we just had a lot of inventory. There was just a lot of a lot of characters that either were used or could be used, or so you just have to. It was just a lot of stuff. It was like, I think when we started out, I thought, okay, well, this will rival Crank Yankers, because Crank Yankers is definitely the biggest, like volume wise show that I've worked on. And then once we got going, I went, oh, this might surpass that, especially because it wasn't over the course of a few months. It
Yeah,
was over the course of like a month.
yeah.
So there was just a lot. There was just a lot that came through. But it was neat. I mean, it was like, when do you get the opportunity to be in the room with all of those puppets? It's
Yeah.
not often. So even if you work, like I've been working with Muppets on and off for a while, for like, a few years now. And usually you just wouldn't have the opportunity to be in the room with more than a couple of puppets at a time. So it was very cool to be like, wow, no, like anyone you can imagine, like might be here right now, or might
Yeah.
not, but might be here right now. So,
Well,
yeah.
we're all very excited to see that when it comes out, and I'd like that's a good segue, I think, kind of to go into my very last question, which I
Mhm.
always ask is, what has been the highlight of your puppetry career so far?
Mhm. Excellent question. I think for me, because I'm multi hyphenate, it's like trying to pick your favorite child, which is Rue. Rue is my favorite child. You have to tell my human son and my not human son, but Rue is the favorite. But for me, it's like, because on different things, I wear different hats. I have different reasons for them to be highlights. I mean, it was definitely like Rescue Rue getting to off Broadway was a massive highlight for me, even if it was during the Omicron spike. Being able to do that was really special. But like as a wrangler, spending a lot of years as a wrangler and knowing that usually there isn't really any, not, I don't want to say like, it's not like it's better necessarily, but like there's no upward movement from wrangler. Wrangler is wrangler. You could be a head wrangler on something, but usually beyond that, the chances of something like supervising don't come up very often, because of what I was saying before, where a lot of sets just don't have more than a wrangler. If you're lucky, there's a wrangler. So being kind of gifted the opportunity to be the workshop supervisor on the Muppet Show was really special, just because I had not held any positions like that for someone else in that way. Like, yes, I got to direct on Dusty and Dot and that was in and of itself pretty amazing to be gifted that opportunity. But I've spent almost 20 years as a wrangler, and being able to get to the point where someone trusted me with those characters in that way was something that I will not forget. Yeah,
Awesome. Well, Stacey, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us on the show today.
you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
My thanks to Stacey Weingarten for being on the show. For links to some of the things we discussed, check out the show notes for this episode number 113, over at underthepuppet.com. And if you'd like to hear even more of my conversation with Stacey, it's available to the bonus content patrons over at patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. I would like to send out a special thank you to all the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who help make this show possible. Patreon patrons at the producer level and above who get a special shout out are Kathy Crawford, Eve Cunning, David Akers, Tony Urbano, Brandy, Scott Armstrong, Paul, Ricky Chavez, and Lee Thompson. To become a patron, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media, and thank you for your support. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback about the show, send them via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com, or you can connect with the show on Instagram or Facebook by searching for Under the Puppet. And don't forget to tell a friend about the show. This episode featured music by Dan Ring and was expertly edited by Steven Staver. Thank you so much for listening. Under the Puppet is copyright 2025 Saturday Morning Media, Grant Pachoco, executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.